Hello and welcome back to MindMap HQ.
It is good to be back.
Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're not just breaking down a business strategy book.
No, this one's deeper.
It is. We are technically diving into finance, but honestly, this feels a lot more like philosophy. Maybe even, bit of therapy.
Oh, it's absolutely therapy. And probably cheaper than the real thing, considering the kind of mistakes this book helps you avoid.
We're tackling the one subject that, well, it makes the world go round, it ruins marriages, it builds empires, and yet, for all that, it's so surprisingly misunderstood.
We're talking about money.
We are talking about money, but not in the way you might think. We're not talking about interest rates or which crypto coin is going to the moon next week.
Thank goodness. I don't think my brain can handle another one of those conversations.
Me neither. Today, we are decoding Morgan Housel's modern classic, The Psychology of Money.
It's such a great one.
It is. And the core premise, the whole argument of the book, is that doing well with money has very little to do with how smart you are.
Right. It's not about your SAT score.
No, it has everything to do with how you behave. It's a soft skill, not a hard science.
Which is, frankly, a huge relief for me because I was truly terrible at calculus.
Weren't we all?
But seriously, you're right. This book is one of those rare things that people deep inside the industry, and I mean like hedge fund managers, serious bankers, the real heavy hitters, they quietly pass this book around to each other.
Because it's not about the mechanics.
No, it's not about the spreadsheets. It's about what happens inside your head when you're forced to interact with those spreadsheets. It's about the panic and the greed.
So to kick things off and to really frame why this conversation is so important, we have to start with the story that opens the entire book. It sets the stage perfectly.
It's the perfect setup.
It's the tale of two men. On one side, we have Ronald Reed.
The legend, Ronald Reed.
And Ronald Reed was a janitor. He worked as a gas station attendant in rural Vermont his whole life.
And when you say rural, you mean rural. This guy's life was the definition of quiet.
Totally. He was the first person in his entire family to graduate from high school, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently he used to hitchhike to campus every single day because he just didn't have another way to get there.
This is a guy who, at age 38, bought a small two-bedroom house for $12,000.
$12,000.
And lived there for the rest of his life.
His main hobby wasn't, golf or sailing. It was chopping firewood.
It's a very humble, almost invisible life, isn't it? He died in 2014 at the age of 92. And up until that exact moment, everyone who knew him, his friends, his stepkids, they just thought he was a nice, frugal guy.
Maybe even a little broke. Someone you might feel a bit sorry for.
Exactly. But then he dies, the will is read, and all of a sudden, this quiet janitor is making international headlines.
Because Ronald Reed, the janitor, left behind a net worth of over $8 million.
$8 million.
From sweeping floors and pumping gas. It's just unbelievable.
And I want to be super clear for anyone listening who's immediately skeptical, he didn't win the lottery.
Yeah. He didn't get a surprise inheritance from a rich uncle.
Nope, that's the craziest part.
Yeah.
He saved what little he could from a tiny salary. He bought boring blue chip stocks like Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, and then he just waited.
He waited for decades.
He let compounding do all the heavy lifting for him while he was out chopping wood. And in the end, he left $6 million to his local library and hospital.
So that's Ronald Reed, the tortoise in this story. Now, in the other corner, we have Richard Fuscone.
Richard Fuscone. He was everything Ronald Reed was not.
Everything. If you were casting a movie about a master of the universe Wall Street type from the 80s, you'd cast this guy.
Oh, 100%. He was Harvard educated. He had an MBA. He was a top executive at Merrill Lynch. He was so successful in finance that he actually retired in his 40s to become a full-time philanthropist.
He was a 40 under 40 winner in Crane's Business magazine. He was, by all accounts, the definition of smart money.
He had the pedigree, the connections, the Ivy League education. But while Ronald Reed was quietly saving his pennies in Vermont, Fuscone was borrowing. He was borrowing heavily to expand his massive home in Greenwich, Connecticut.
And when you say massive, what are we talking about?
We're talking 18,000 square feet.
That's not a house.
It's a private hotel. It had 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 swimming pools, and 7 garages. And just to maintain the place, just to keep the lights on and the pools clean, it cost him something like $90,000 a month.
$90,000 a month. That is just staggering. But, I mean, he was rich, right? So he could afford it.
He could afford it.
Yeah.
Until suddenly he couldn't. The 2008 financial crisis hits. And because Fuscone was leveraged to the hilt, meaning he had a ton of debt propping up all these illiquid assets, he was completely wiped out.
So he went bankrupt.
Declared bankruptcy, that massive house. It was sold at a foreclosure auction for 75% less than what the insurance company even thought it was worth. A total fire sale.
So there you have it. You have a janitor who dies a multimillionaire and a Harvard-educated finance executive who goes completely broke. And that right there is the central tension of this whole deep dive. I mean, in what other industry is that even possible?
It's impossible anywhere else. That's a thing that's so wild. You never, ever hear a story about a patient janitor performing better heart surgery than a Harvard-trained surgeon. You don't see a janitor designing a better skyscraper than a trained architect because he was more patient.
Right. Those are hard sciences. If you don't know the technical skills, if you haven't done the residency or gotten the degree, you fail, period.
But investing is unique. It is the one field where a guy who behaves correctly, like Ronald Reid, can absolutely crush a certified genius who behaves poorly, like Richard Fuscone. It's the only domain where behavior consistently outperforms raw intelligence.
So today we're going to unpack exactly why that is. We're going to look at the psychology behind greed, fear, luck, risk, and the very strange way our brains try to process compounding.
And before we jump into the first chapter, just a quick reminder for everyone listening. We're going to be talking about some concepts today, like the Ice Age theory of compounding and the man-in-the-car paradox that are, well, they're really helped by visuals. If you want to see the mind maps and charts we've put together for this deep dive, head over to our YouTube channel, MindMap HQ, and hit subscribe. It really helps support the show, and it'll help you lock in these ideas.
All right, let's get into the deep dive. Chapter 1 is titled, No One is Crazy.
I love this title. I really do. It's such a compassionate way to start a book about money.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, because usually finance people are so judgmental. They look at how normal people spend their money and just say, you're an idiot. Why did you buy that? Why aren't you saving 20%? It's very condescending.
But Housel starts with this premise that, look, we all think we know how the world works, but in reality, we've only ever experienced a tiny, tiny sliver of it.
Oh, sliver. Yeah.
He has this great line where he says, your personal experiences with money make up maybe 0.000000001% of what's happened in the world.
Right.
But they constitute something like 80% of how you think the world works.
It's the idea of anchoring, right? You're anchored to your own personal history. We are all, in a way, prisoners of the time period we were born in.
Let's break that down with the generation gap example from the book, because I think this explains so much about why, say, boomers and millennials seem to have such different views on money.
Oh, absolutely. It's all about your formative years. So, take the stock market. If you were born in, say, 1970, the S&P 500 increased something like tenfold during your teens and 20s.
That 10x return.
Yeah, that's your formative financial era. You watched the market just explode upwards. So you probably came away thinking the stock market is this incredible, almost magical wealth-generating machine. And you'd be right, based on your experience.
Right. Your personal data is incredibly optimistic. So you're optimistic. But now, compare that to someone who was born just 20 years earlier in 1950.
Totally different world. If you were born in 1950, the market basically went nowhere during your teens and 20s. When you adjust for inflation, it was flat. It was dead money for 2 decades.
So you have these two people, both smart, both reasonable, and you ask them, is the stock market a good place to put your savings?
And the person born in 1970 says, yes. Obviously. What kind of question is that?
And the person born in 1950 says, are you kidding me? It's a casino. You'll lose your shirt. Stay away.
And the key is, neither of them is crazy.
No.
They're just extrapolating from the data they personally lived through.
Yeah.
They're both making a perfectly rational analysis of their own limited experience.
There's that great little anecdote in the book about Bill Gross, the famous bond king, founder of PIMCO.
A total titan of the industry.
A complete titan. But he admitted in an interview that if he'd been born just a decade earlier or a decade later, his career probably would have looked completely different. He wouldn't have become the bond king.
Right, because his entire career, from start to finish, coincided perfectly with this massive, once-in-a-generation collapse in interest rates.
And when interest rates fall.
Bond prices rise. He was basically surfing a 40-year-long tidal wave that he was born at the perfect moment to catch.
But his father's generation, for them, Bonds were a terrible investment.
They called them wealth incinerators because they lived through a period of high inflation that just destroyed bond values. So again, you can't just look at a spreadsheet and say, this is the optimal strategy. You have to understand that every single person is bringing their own history, their own emotional baggage to the table.
Speaking of emotional baggage and behaviors that look crazy from the outside,
Yeah.
we have to talk about lottery tickets.
This is the stat that it stops me in my tracks every single time I read it. Americans spend more money on lottery tickets than they do on movies, video games, music, sporting events, and books combined.
That is just, it almost impossible to even visualize that amount of money.
It's billions and billions of dollars. And here's the kicker, the part that makes finance people shake their heads.
It's mostly poor people buying them.
It is. The lowest income households spend, on average, $412 a year on lotto tickets. Now, you have to remember, something like 40% of Americans can't come up with $400 for an emergency.
So they're spending their entire safety net, essentially, on a 1 in a million shot.
Yes. And from a purely mathematical, rational perspective, that is a terrible decision. It looks completely insane.
It does. It looks like they're just bad at math. But Housel does something brilliant. He flips it. He tries to get inside their headspace.
He tries to find the reasonable explanation, not the rational one.
Exactly. He says, look, if you're in that income bracket, you can't really afford the things society tells you should want. You can't buy a nice house. You can't take your family on a real vacation. You can't put your kids through college without taking on crushing, life-altering debt.
The traditional path to the American dream feels completely blocked off. The system feels rigged against you.
Right. So the lottery ticket isn't really a financial investment. It's not about the expected return. It's a purchase of hope.
It's the only time they get to hold a tangible piece of paper in their hand that says, maybe. It gives them permission to dream, even for just a minute, of having the things that you and I might take for granted.
Housel says, you don't have to agree with their reasoning, but you can start to understand why it persists.
It's psychology, not math. If you take the feeling of hope out of the equation, the math is terrible. But if you value the hope itself, well, then maybe $400 a year makes a certain kind of sense. And that's the whole lesson of Chapter 1. Don't judge people's financial decisions until you understand what game they're actually playing.
And that sets the stage perfectly for the next idea. Because we are all playing different games with different rules, shaped by different forces.
Which brings us to Segment B, Luck and Risk.
Or, as Housel calls them, siblings. This might be my favorite story in the whole book because it involves someone we all think we know so well.
You're talking about Bill Gates?
Bill Gates. We all know he's brilliant. We know he worked incredibly hard. No one's trying to dispute that.
Of course not. But do we know about Lakeside School?
That's the real question. Let's look at the numbers here because they're pretty wild. In 1968, a young Bill Gates was a student at Lakeside School in Seattle. Now, this was a private school, so it was already exclusive.
Sure.
But it was unique for one very specific reason.
It had a computer.
It had a computer. It was one of the only high schools in the world, literally, one of the only places on the entire planet that had a computer terminal that students could actually use.
And we should be clear, we're not talking about a MacBook Air here.
No, not at all.
We're talking about a Teletype Model 33.
Right.
This thing was a clunky dinosaur. It didn't even have a screen. It printed out everything on paper. But it was connected to a mainframe computer. Even most colleges didn't have that kind of access back then.
And because of this weird, lucky combination of a Mother's Club bake sale raising some money and a very forward-thinking teacher, 13-year-old Bill Gates had basically unlimited access to a computer in 1968.
So Housel actually does the math on this probability. In 1968, there were roughly 303 million high school-age people in the world. About 18 million of them lived in the U.S. About 270,000 lived in Washington state, maybe 100,000 in the Seattle area, and only about 300 of those kids went to Lakeside.
So you're filtering down from 303 million to just 300.
You are, and what you realize is that Bill Gates experienced what was, statistically, a 1 in a million stroke of pure luck just by being in that specific classroom at that specific time. Gates himself admits it. He says, if there had been no Lakeside, there would have been no Microsoft.
So that's the luck side of the equation. We love telling that story. It's inspiring. But luck has a sibling, and that sibling is risk.
This is the part of the story I'd never heard before reading this book, and it's just as important. The story of Kent Evans.
Tell us about Kent.
Kent Evans was Bill Gates' best friend in 8th grade. And by Gates' own admission, Kent was the smartest kid in the entire class. He was just as obsessed with that teletype computer as Bill was. They were a trio: Bill Gates, Paul Allen, and Kent Evans.
They were already planning their future. They used to talk about how they were going to be CEOs together. They had it all mapped out. It was supposed to be the three of them founding Microsoft.
But Kent Evans never graduated from high school. Before graduation, he died in a mountaineering accident.
And the statistical odds of that happening.
The odds of a high school student in the U.S. dying in a mountaineering accident are roughly 1 in a million.
And there it is, the exact same magnitude of force, just pushing in the opposite direction.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? Bill Gates experienced 1 in a million luck. Kent Evans experienced 1 in a million risks.
It's tragic, but it's such a profound lesson about how we view success and failure in life, and especially with money.
It really is. We tend to look at super successful people like Gates, and we attribute 100% of their success to skill and hard work. And we look at people who fail, or in this extreme case, people who didn't even make it to the starting line, and we assume they must have done something wrong or lacked vision or weren't smart enough.
When sometimes it's just the roll of the dice.
It is. And Housel's point here is that nothing is as good or as bad as it seems. When you see someone who's incredibly wealthy, you have to realize that luck probably played a significant role.
And when you see someone who went broke, you have to realize that risk, the kind you can't see or predict, might have just blindsided them.
It means we should be much slower to judge others, and we should also be really careful about trying to precisely replicate someone else's success. Just because you drop out of Harvard like Bill Gates doesn't mean you're going to found Microsoft, because you can't replicate the 1 in a million lucky break he got 10 years prior at Lakeside. You can't copy the luck.
Which leads us nicely into segment C, never enough. This is all about the danger of greed, and specifically the danger of constantly moving the goalpost.
Ah yes, the rich people doing crazy things chapter.
The cautionary tale here is the story of Rajat Gupta.
Rajat Gupta. I mean, this guy's resume was just insane. He was born in Kolkata, orphaned as a teenager, but he rises through the ranks to become the CEO of McKinsey & Company, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in the world.
He was on the board of Goldman Sachs, Procter & Gamble. He was respected globally, and he was worth $100 million.
Let's just pause on that number for a second. $100 million. He had already won the game. He could do literally anything he wanted for the rest of his life. He could buy islands. His great-great-grandkids were set for life. He had enough by any reasonable person's standard.
But he didn't feel like he had enough by his standard. And that's the trap.
That's the trap. He was hanging out with billionaires. He was on these boards in the same rooms as the true masters of the universe. And compared to them, he felt poor. He desperately wanted to be in the billionaire club.
So this is 2008, right at the peak of the financial crisis. Warren Buffett agrees to make a huge $5 billion investment into Goldman Sachs to help save the bank. Gupta is on the Goldman board, so he hears about this on a confidential conference call before it's public.
This is the kind of information that's like the holy grail of insider trading. It's material, non-public information. If you know Warren Buffett is about to buy a massive stake in a company, you know for a fact that the stock is about to go up.
So Gupta hangs up the phone from that board meeting, and 16 seconds later, 16 seconds, he calls a hedge fund manager named Rajaratnam.
He leaks the info. Rajaratnam immediately goes and buys huge amounts of Goldman stock. The deal is announced publicly, the stock pops, and they make a quick, illegal $1 million profit.
It was so blatant. And of course, the FBI eventually catches them. Gupta goes to prison. His reputation is completely and utterly destroyed. He lost everything.
And you just have to ask why. Why would a guy with $100 million risk his freedom, his legacy, his entire reputation for what? A little bit more.
Because the goalpost had moved. His definition of rich had changed. He wasn't comparing himself to the average person on the street anymore.
No, he was comparing himself to the hedge fund guys who were making $500 million a year. It's the deadly problem of social comparison.
The book has this great little mental model, like a ladder of comparison. It starts with a rookie baseball player who signs a contract for $500,000 a year. He feels incredibly rich.
Of course he does. He's on top of the world. But then he looks over at the star player, Mike Trout, who has a $430 million contract. And suddenly, that rookie feels broke.
Right. Then Mike Trout looks at a top hedge fund manager who made $340 million in 1 year.
And that hedge fund manager, he looks at the top 5 managers who each made over $700 million.
And those guys look at Warren Buffett, who made $3.5 billion that year. And Buffett looks at Jeff Bezos. It never ends.
The ceiling is always moving. It's too high to ever actually hit. If your goal is just a little bit more than the guy next to me, you will never ever be happy, and you will eventually be tempted to take a risk that destroys you.
The lesson Gupta missed, the one that cost him everything, is that there is absolutely no reason to risk what you have and need for something that you don't have and don't need.
Don't risk what you need for what you don't need. That should be like a mantra for anyone with a brokerage account. It sounds so simple, but when you're in the heat of the moment and your ego is involved and you see your neighbor just bought a new Porsche, it's a really, really hard rule to follow.
Speaking of things that are really hard for the human brain to grasp, let's talk about segment D, confounding compounding.
Oh, I love this one. This is the part where our basic intuition just completely and totally fails us. We think in straight lines. 1 + 1 + 1, linear.
We think 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right. But compounding is exponential. It's 2, 4, 8, 16. It's a curve that just explodes upwards.
Housel uses this fantastic analogy of the Ice Ages to explain it.
Yeah, so for a long time, scientists couldn't quite figure out what caused the Earth to have these massive ice ages. The intuitive theory was that the winters must have just been insanely, brutally cold to freeze so much of the planet.
Makes sense. Big ice requires big cold. That's linear thinking.
Exactly. But it turns out that wasn't it. The theory that finally stuck came from a Serbian mathematician named Milankovic. And he realized it wasn't about brutally cold winters. It was about cool summers.
Cool summers? Yeah. How does a cool summer create a sheet of ice that's a mile thick?
It's all about the melt, or the lack of melt. If the summer isn't hot enough to melt all of the previous winter's snow, then a little bit of that snow stays. And since snow is white, it reflects sunlight, which keeps the ground a little bit cooler, which means the next winter is even snowier. And then the next summer, even less of it melts.
And so over thousands and thousands of years, that tiny little bit of leftover snow compounds on itself.
Exactly. It wasn't one huge dramatic event. It was a tiny bit of accumulation that never got wiped out, year after year, century after century.
And this maps perfectly onto the story of Warren Buffett.
Oh, the Buffett stat in this book is the one I tell everyone. It just breaks people's brains when they hear it.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so at the time the book was written, Warren Buffett's net worth was roughly $84.5 billion.
Okay, a huge number.
Huge number. But of that $84.5 billion, $81.5 billion of it came after his 65th birthday.
Whoa. Wait, say that again.
$81.5 billion of his $84.5 billion fortune was accumulated after he qualified for Social Security.
So basically, his entire fortune, everything we know him for, came in his old age.
Yes. Our brains just don't get that. We think linearly. We assume he made $1 billion a year for 80 years. But that's not how it works. Buffett started investing when he was 10 years old. He's now in his 90s. That is a massive, massive runway for that snow to accumulate and compound.
The book compares him to Jim Simons, the head of Renaissance Technologies. And Simons is, by the numbers, a much better investor. His annual returns are way higher.
Way higher. Simons has compounded money at 66% annually, which is just an absurd, unheard of number. Buffett is closer to 22%. You'd think Simons would be the richest man on earth.
But Simons is worth about $21 billion at the time of writing, compared to Buffett's $84 billion. And the reason is simple.
Simons didn't really start his fund until he was 50. Buffett had a 40-year head start.
If Buffett had started investing at 30 and then retired at 60, like a normal, successful person, you would have never heard of him. His net worth would have been something like $11 million. Very respectable, but not a household name.
So the real secret to Buffett's success isn't just that he's a good stock picker. It's that he's been a good stock picker for 80 consecutive years. Time is the most powerful force in investing. It's the exponent.
And that leads perfectly into the next segment. Because if time is the single most important variable, then the most important skill isn't getting rich, it's survival.
It's just sticking around long enough for time to do its magic.
Which brings us to segment E, getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
And these are two completely different skill sets. They require opposite mindsets.
Getting wealthy requires a certain amount of optimism. You have to take risks. You have to put yourself out there, believe the future will be better than the past.
But staying wealthy, that requires a dose of paranoia.
Healthy paranoia. It requires you to look at the money you've made and think, this could all go away in an instant. It requires humility.
The story used to illustrate this is Jesse Livermore.
One of the greatest stock traders of the early 20th century. This guy was a legend in his own time. In 1929, the stock market crashed, kicking off the Great Depression. Wall Street was in absolute ruins. People were literally jumping out of windows.
A terrible, terrible time.
And Jesse Livermore.
He had shorted the market. He bet that it would go down. He goes home to his wife, who is terrified that they're completely ruined. And he tells her, actually, honey, this was my best trading day ever. He made the equivalent of $3 billion in a single day.
He's the king of the world.
The king of the world. But he was a risk taker. That was his identity. He couldn't flip the switch in his brain to survival mode. He kept taking huge leveraged bets. He thought he was invincible.
And just 4 years later, he had lost it all. He was broke. And tragically, he eventually took his own life.
He was brilliant at getting wealthy, but terrible at staying wealthy.
Contrast that with the simple idea of survival. Housel says the single most important word in finance is survival. You need to make yourself financially unbreakable so you can stick around long enough for the good luck and the compounding to find you.
It reminds me of that other story in the book, the one about Rick Guerin.
I've never heard of him before this.
Yeah.
He was the third Beatle, the third partner with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, right?
Exactly. Way back in the day, it was Buffett, Munger, and Rick Guerin. They were all brilliant. They all used the exact same investing strategy. But you and I have never heard of Rick Guerin. Why?
Because he was in a hurry.
He was in a hurry. He used a lot of margin. He borrowed money to invest because he wanted to get rich faster than the other two. In the market crash of the 70s, the market dropped 70%. Buffett and Munger had cash and no debt, so they held on and even bought more.
But Guerin got a margin call.
He gave margin called. He was forced by his broker to sell all of his Berkshire Hathaway shares right at the bottom of the market just to pay back his debts. He got completely wiped out.
And Buffett's quote on it is just chilling. He said, "Charlie and I knew we would get rich. We weren't in a hurry. Rick was just as smart as us. But he was in a hurry."
Being in a hurry is the most expensive mistake you can make in investing.
This brings us to a lighter, but maybe the most profound segment of all. Segment F, freedom.
The highest dividend money pays.
We're so often taught that the point of money is to buy stuff. To buy nice cars, big houses, fancy clothes. But all the research shows that those things don't actually make us happy, at least not for very long.
No, the hedonic treadmill kicks in almost immediately. You get the new car, you feel cool for about a month, and then it's just your car. The thrill is gone.
Housel cites the work of a psychologist named Angus Campbell, who spent his career studying what actually contributes to human happiness. And the single most important common denominator wasn't income level. It wasn't geography or education. It was having a strong sense of controlling one's own life.
The ability to say, I can do what I want, when I want, with who I want, that right there is the definition of true wealth.
There's a great story about John D. Rockefeller, who was, arguably the richest man in modern history. But he spent most of his days doing nothing.
Yeah, people would describe seeing him just sitting in his office staring out the window for hours. A refinery worker once said he lets everybody else talk while he sits back and says nothing.
But he wasn't being lazy. He was thinking. His job wasn't to drill oil wells or manage payroll. His job was to make a few very high-quality decisions per year. And to do that, he needed unstructured time. He needed freedom from the daily grind of busy work.
And you look at the modern world, and we are richer than ever in terms of stuff. Our TVs are 4K and huge, our cars are safer, our houses are bigger, but we have less control over our time than ever before.
We're constantly plugged in. The factory is now in our pockets on our smartphones, buzzing us at all hours.
So we've used our increased wealth to buy better stuff, but we've accidentally sold our time and our autonomy to get it. And that's a big reason why, despite being objectively richer, people don't report being any happier.
The big takeaway here is to start thinking about money, not as a tool to buy things, but as a tool to buy independence. Having 6 months of living expenses saved in the bank isn't just about paying the bills if you get laid off.
No, it's about having the power to not tolerate a toxic boss because you know you won't starve if you quit. It's about owning your time. It's about freedom.
I love that quote from the book. Money's greatest intrinsic value, and this cannot be overstated, is its ability to give you control over your time.
Amen to that.
Okay, let's move into the rabbit hole. This is where we step back from the specific chapters and just discuss some of the broader, more philosophical implications that really stuck with us from this deep dive.
And I know where you want to start. Let's talk about cars. I know you want to talk about the man in the car paradox.
I do. This one hit a little too close to home because I'll admit it, when I see a really nice car, a Ferrari or something, I look.
We all do, of course. So Housel tells this story from when he was younger and worked as a valet at a fancy hotel in Los Angeles. He got to drive Ferraris, Lamborghinis, Rolls Royces, all of it. And he noticed something really interesting.
What was that?
When he saw a Ferrari pull up to the hotel, he never once looked at the person driving it and thought, wow, that guy is so cool.
What did he think instead?
He thought, wow, if I had that car, people would think that I am cool. He completely ignored the driver and just placed himself in the driver's seat.
And that is the paradox in a nutshell. The person who bought the Ferrari thinks he's buying respect and admiration. He thinks everyone on the street is looking at him, admiring him. But they're not. They're ignoring him completely and just imagining themselves driving the car.
Exactly. People don't actually want you. They want the feeling they think your stuff will provide for them. It's an exercise in futility.
This leads directly to the definition check that I think is one of the most critical ideas in the whole book.
Yeah.
The difference between being rich and being wealthy.
Yeah. In everyday language, we use those words interchangeably. But Housel draws a really sharp, important line between them.
Rich, he says, is current income. It's visible. If you see someone driving a $100,000 car, you know that they are rich, or at least they have a high income or a very high tolerance for debt.
You see the spending.
You see the spending. But wealth, real wealth, is hidden.
Wealth is income that is not spent. Wealth is the option you didn't take to buy something later. Wealth is the $100,000 you didn't spend on the car that's now sitting in your brokerage account, compounding, buying you freedom and options.
It reminds me of that amazing quote from Rihanna's financial advisor. She apparently almost went bankrupt because she was spending money like crazy, and her advisor had to sit her down and say, was it necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
It's so savage, but it is so profoundly true. We judge other people's wealth by what we can see. We see the cars, the houses, the vacations on Instagram. We don't see their bank accounts or their debt statements. So we try to emulate the visible part, the spending, which is the very thing that prevents us from building the invisible part, the actual wealth.
It's like a diet analogy. You can see the person at the next table eating a salad.
Yeah.
You can't see all the calories they didn't eat for the rest of the day. Wealth is the calories you don't consume. It's impossible to learn from it because it's invisible by its very nature.
Which is why Ronald Read is such a ghost. You couldn't see his wealth. His neighbors had no idea until he died.
Let's go a bit deeper down the rabbit hole with discussion B, reasonable versus rational.
This is where all the beautiful spreadsheets and financial models fall apart.
In traditional economics and finance, the core assumption is that humans are rational actors. We assume that we should always make the mathematically optimal decision to maximize our returns.
But we aren't robots. We're not Vulcans. We're emotional, hormonal, tired, stressed out monkeys who just happen to have access to the stock market. And Housel argues that we shouldn't aim to be coldly rational. We should aim to be reasonable.
The analogy he uses for this is having a fever.
Right. So biologically, a fever is a useful defense mechanism. It raises your body's temperature to help kill a virus or infection. So, strictly speaking, it is rational to let a fever run its course because it might help you get better faster.
But it's not reasonable to just suffer through a 104-degree fever, shivering and miserable and unable to function if you don't have to. So what do? We take Tylenol. It might prolong the illness by a day, but it makes the entire experience bearable.
Exactly. And investing is exactly the same. Mathematically, it might be rational for a 25-year-old to have 100% of their money in stocks and even use leverage or debt to buy more. The math on the spreadsheet says you'll end up richer over 40 years.
But is it a reasonable strategy for a human being?
No, absolutely not, because the first time the market crashes 50%, which it will, you will panic. You will lose sleep for weeks. You will be an emotional wreck, and you will almost certainly sell everything right at the bottom, locking in your losses. The rational strategy fails because you, a human, can't emotionally stick to it.
So the best investment strategy isn't the one with the highest possible return on paper. It's the one that helps you sleep at night.
Because if you can sleep at night, you can stick with it for the long run. And if you can stick with it for the long run, you get to experience the magic of compounding we talked about earlier.
I love the example of paying off your mortgage early. Mathematically, with interest rates being historically low, you probably shouldn't do it. You should invest that extra money in the stock market instead, because the expected return is higher.
It's a classic arbitrage opportunity on paper.
But the feeling of owning your home outright, the psychological security of knowing that no matter what happens, you have a roof over your head that no one can take away, That feeling might be worth more than the few extra percentage points of return. It's reasonable, even if it's not perfectly rational.
It's about pricing and sleeping well at night.
Exactly. Okay, discussion C, tails, and room for error. This is about the weird mathematics of success.
Tails drive everything. This is basically the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule on steroids.
We tend to have this idea that to be a successful investor, you have to be right most of the time. You have to pick more winners than losers.
Turns out that's not true at all. You can be wrong half the time, or even most of the time, and still make an absolute fortune.
The data on this is just so compelling. If you look at the Russell 3000 Index, which is a really broad index of U.S. companies since 1980, 40% of the stocks in that index have lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered.
Just think about that for a second. 4 out of every 10 companies were catastrophic failures. They were effectively zeros in your portfolio.
But the index itself as a whole went up more than 73-fold during that time. How is that possible?
Because of the tails. The tiny fraction of companies, maybe 7%, that were massive, massive winners, the Apples, the Amazons, the Microsofts, their extraordinary returns more than made up for all the duds.
It's the same in venture capital. A VC firm expects half of their portfolio companies to fail completely. They just need one Uber or one Airbnb in a portfolio of 50 to pay for all the other failures and produce incredible returns.
There's that great story of Heinz Berggruen, the legendary art dealer. He built this incredible collection of Picassos, Klees, Matisses. People were just amazed at his genius for picking masterpieces.
But the reality was he didn't just pick masterpieces. He bought everything. He bought thousands and thousands of pieces of art. 99% of what he bought was probably worthless. But the 1% that turned out to be masterpieces made him a legend. You can be wrong most of the time and still win big, and this connects directly to the idea of room for error. If you know that failure is a normal part of the process, that you're going to be wrong a lot, then you have to build a margin of safety into your plan.
Housel uses the example of professional blackjack card counters. They know mathematically that the odds are slightly in their favor over the long run, but they don't bet every dollar they have on a single hand.
Why not?
Because even if you have a 52% edge, you can still easily lose 10 hands in a row due to pure dumb luck. That's just variance. If you bet everything on each hand, you'd go bust before the long-term math had a chance to work in your favor.
You have to survive the short-term randomness.
Exactly. You have to bet small enough to ensure you can survive a long losing streak. You have to plan on your plan not going according to plan.
I love that line. Plan on your plan not going according to plan. It's such a great practical piece of wisdom.
It's the only way to survive in a world that is fundamentally random and unpredictable.
Which brings us to our last rabbit hole discussion. D, the surprise factor.
Or why history is not a map of the future.
We are obsessed with using history to predict the future, especially in finance. We look at charts from the crash of 1929 or 1987 or 2008 and we say, aha, I see a pattern here. This is what's going to happen next.
But Housel points out that history is actually the study of surprises. The most important events, the ones that move the needle the most for the world and for the markets, were by definition things that nobody saw coming.
The Great Depression, Pearl Harbor, September 11th, the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. None of those events were in anyone's economic models or forecasts the year before they happened.
Right. If you asked an economist in 1940 to predict the next 50 years of economic growth, and they didn't know about World War II, the invention of the nuclear bomb, or the rise of the internet, their prediction would be completely useless.
The lesson from this isn't that we should get better at predicting surprises. That's impossible.
The lesson is that we should just accept that the world is, and always will be, surprising.
The Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman said the correct lesson to learn from surprises is not to think, I'll predict better next time. The correct lesson is to conclude that the world is surprising.
Which means your financial plan needs to be durable enough to withstand things you cannot even imagine today. Not just, what if the market drops 20%, but what if a novel virus shuts down the entire global economy for a year?
Or what if I, as a person, change my mind about what I want out of life? What if I decide I want to become a monk and move to Tibet? Your own changes are a surprise too.
You need a plan that's flexible enough to survive reality.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The janitor versus the executive, the power of compounding, the critical need for survival. Let's try to bring it all together in the verdict.
Let's do it. The verdict.
When you boil it all down, what do you think is the main purpose of this book?
I think it's a deprogramming tool. I really do. We are all programmed from a young age to think of money as math, as a spreadsheet. Input A, get output B. Housel's entire project is to say, no, money is psychology, it's emotions, it's dopamine and cortisol firing in an ancient brain that wasn't designed for this.
It shifts the entire focus away from getting rich, which is all about high income and taking big risks, and toward independence, which is all about your savings rate and survival.
So what's your final rating? Is this a book for the serious student of finance?
I'm giving this a definitive must-read. And I think it's especially important for high achievers, for the kind of people who always feel like they need to be doing something. It validates the idea that doing nothing, just letting your money sit there and compound, resisting the urge to tinker, is actually an active, difficult, and heroic choice.
It's the hardest thing in the world to do. Just sitting on your hands when the world feels like it's going crazy is a genuine superpower.
It is. What about you? What's your take?
I'm going to be brutally honest here. If you are listening to this and you're looking for hot stock tips for 2026, this book is completely useless to you. Throw it in the trash. It will not tell you how to beat the market.
That's very true.
But if you want to understand why you panic sold your crypto at the absolute bottom, or why you bought that expensive car you know you can't really afford, or why you feel anxious about money even though you have a good job, then this book is absolutely essential reading.
It's a mirror.
It's a mirror. It exposes the fact that we are all just, as he says, hairless apes, trying to navigate a complex financial system that we invented 50 years ago using brains that were designed to run away from lions on the savannah.
Hairless apes with bank accounts. It's a dangerous combination.
It is. And this book is a reality check. It teaches you to be less judgmental of other people's financial decisions and maybe, more importantly, a lot more forgiving of your own.
I think that's a perfect summary. It's a book about behavior, and behavior is incredibly hard to teach.
But it can be learned. It can be improved.
Before we sign off, I just want to leave our listeners with one final thought from the postscript of the book. Housel talks about the history of the American consumer economy.
Yeah, how we even got here in the first place.
We all live with this immense pressure to keep up with the Joneses. But the problem is the Joneses have changed. In the 1950s, the Joneses were the people who lived next door who maybe had a slightly nicer lawnmower. Today, because of social media, the Joneses are Jeff Bezos and the Kardashians and every influencer showing their perfect life.
The comparison group has gone from our neighborhood to the entire planet. And that makes us feel perpetually poor, even if we are objectively richer than our grandparents could have ever dreamed of being.
So the final thought is this. Wealth is what you don't see. Stop trying to use money to impress people who, frankly, don't really care about you.
And remember, if you want to see the visual breakdown of the man in the car paradox or that Ice Age compounding graph, check us out on YouTube at MindMap HQ.
Stay grounded.
And please stop buying Ferraris to impress me. I'm looking at the car, not you.